Kelsey. This is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm doing the second of this year's BooktubeSFF Babbles videos. These are discussion prompts provided in association with the BooktubeSFF Awards. I'll link all the information down below. And this week's topic is a reaction or response to this year's BooktubeSFF Award nominee shortlist. The reading period for these nominees is the next 2 months, March and April, for anyone who wants to join in with the group reads of these titles. And so in addition to telling you which ones of these books I may have already read, I'll be talking about which ones I am planning on reading or hoping to read and how high priority or low priority all of those books are. So in the adult fantasy category, we have 3 nominees, and it is my happy day, happy year, because they are all standalones, and like fantasy standalones are the bread and butter of my reading. I love them. It is not my happy day because although I really want to read all 3 of these books, I have not yet read any of them. And this is going to be an endeavor to get through all 3 of these in the next 2 months. So the first of the nominees is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is one that is like fairy tale-ish, inspired by Mayan mythology, 1920s historical Mexico. It's absolutely going to be my thing, I am certain. I've been looking forward to this book since before it was released. It was one I pre-ordered. Next, again, very enthusiastic for number 2, it's The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, another one of my most anticipated releases of last year that I've not yet read. Magic libraries, pretty writing. Again, I am certain I'm gonna love this one. I'll be gravely disappointed if I don't. And then the third is the one that I have some trepidation about, and it's The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which you can tell I have a library copy of that I just picked up my hold on from my library today. This I am game for but nervous about, firstly in a practical sense because this does have a holds list at my library system, so I know I won't be able to renew this. I have this out from the library until the 25th of this month, and I have to finish it by then. So the clock is already ticking, and I'm just trying to shuffle around the things that I'm reading right now and like really want to read by the time Hugo nominations close, for example, to see how soon I can drop it all and start reading this, because even though this isn't the book on this shortlist that I am most excited to read, far from it, it has to be my first priority because of that library due date. Now, the other reason I am nervous about this is because I absolutely despised The Bone Season, which was Samantha Shannon's debut novel. However, I am willing to overlook the poor quality of The Bone Season and give Samantha Shannon as an author a second try for several reasons. First of all, this is just more my genre than The Bone Season was. That was like dystopian, paranormal, weird alternate timeline. It was a lot. There was a lot going on in that book, and it just wasn't my thing. This is more of a traditional epic fantasy. It's got dragons. Secondly, I am fully aware, and I was fully aware when I read The Bone Season, that Samantha Shannon was an incredibly young author when that was published. And I sort of see like the bad trope usage and the poor character development and like the overstuffed, over-ambitious world building of The Bone Season as being like symptoms of a really inexperienced author trying to do something, you know, over her head and being out of her depth. It has been quite a few years since then. She's published several more books in that series and then apparently has decided to take this turn to something really, really different. And I am willing to give this turn to something different a chance from her. The other thing I know about this is that it has a female-female romance as like the main romantic relationship, and that was not being like promoted or hyped about this book prior to its release until people started reading it and was like, hey, do people know that this is a queer book? Because this is a queer book. It's massively long, but the writing doesn't look like it's going to be crazy dense, so I am, with trepidation, going to be starting this really soon. Next up is the adult science fiction category, again with 3 nominees, about which I have some amount of enthusiasm, but considerably less than I do for the nominees in the fantasy category. The first nominee is Recursion by Blake Crouch, which was nowhere on my radar as a book that even existed until it showed up on this shortlist. Why was something so popular that it was going to show up on the BooktubeSFF Awards shortlist nowhere on my radar? I think it's because this is published by a publisher that's not an SFF dedicated imprint. It's one of those books with like some sort of mass popular appeal that was published more as general fiction, and that's just a publishing blind spot for me because I follow dedicated SFF imprints, and then I also follow specific authors that I know I like who publish outside of that sphere. But that is how a new release from someone as apparently popular as Blake Crouch does not even register on my radar. If it's not on my Twitter feed and I don't see it when I go to the SFF section of the bookstore and start browsing for new releases, like, it doesn't exist for me. So, now that I know that this book exists, do I want to read it? No, actually I don't. This is some sort of thrillery thing. I don't want to read some sort of thrillery thing. Next is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir, which is a book that I've already read. I did not nominate it, but good for you if you did. I rated this book 3 stars. I didn't dislike it. I actually sort of disagree with the people who found the beginning portions of the book too slow. It was enough of a page turner for me throughout, even before stuff really got fast. However, I just don't think the particular tone and appeal of this book was ever going to be my thing. When I do finally get around to wrapping this up, I will have some snark about certain aspects of the story. I don't think it will be particularly mean-spirited snark. I don't feel like tearing this book apart and telling you it's bad. It just wasn't really for me. The thing that I do want to snark here in this video about is the fact that everyone nominating this book apparently seems to have come to a unanimous, unspoken agreement that this is science fiction and not fantasy, because it does take place in a space empire, and the way we in America define our genre as anything that involves even the slightest amount of space travel is by default science fiction. However, I will point out, this book had maybe like 3 pages worth of space travel content in it and like 300 pages worth of necromancy. The entire plot of this book is about the magic system. It reads way more as fantasy than science fiction to me. And I can see the way it's setting up the series that the next books in the series may lean more into the space opera aspect of the world building, but this one really, really did not. Now, I'm not that mad that it's in the science fiction category, not fantasy, because I am so pumped to read the fantasy nominees, and I wouldn't wish this to have replaced any one of those. However, I am curious what 4th book would have made it onto the sci-fi shortlist if this had been nominated in fantasy instead. And then the 3rd book in the science fiction category is the one that I am planning on reading, and that's A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine, which I think I will like. This is space empire politics with like some court intrigue. I do own a copy. I will be reading this. Best debut novel is, I think, the only category where something I nominated made it onto the shortlist. That's The 10,000 Doors of January by Alix E. Harrow. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I talked about why I nominated it in my video on what I nominated, which was the first BooktubeSFF Babbles prompt, and I also talked about this in my recent 5-star reads of 2019 video. This was a book that I really enjoyed immersing myself in. I thought it was a beautiful story. And then we have Gideon the Ninth nominated again in this category. I've already talked about this. And A Memory Called Empire nominated again in this category as well. I've already talked about this. Next is the young adult category, in which we have 4 nominees because there was presumably a tie for 3rd place. The first is The Wicked King by Holly Black, which is the sequel to The Cruel Prince. I enjoyed The Cruel Prince as like sort of deliciously trashy popcorn YA last year, so I am hoping this will serve the same purpose for me this year. I actually had this out from the library for months and months a while back, and then had to return it because I ran out of renewals, and I just never got around to reading it. I have it back out from the library. It's not the highest priority for me, but I think I will have it on hand in case whatever else I'm reading isn't working for me and I need to like get out of a reading slump fast. I think that's what this one will do for me. Next is Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, which is the sequel to the other one that was nominated last year. The name I am blanking on. Skyward, that's what it was. This one I will not be reading. Last year I didn't discount the idea that I might read Skyward. I had it out from the library. I knew that, you know, sometimes a big chunky YA book is just the thing, but that was never the big chunky YA book I wanted to pick up, so I didn't, and I returned it to the library unread. Given that that was what happened to me with Skyward last year, I am going to go out on a limb here and say that I'm not going to read Skyward this year, and I'm certainly not going to read both Skyward and Starsight. It's not gonna happen. I'm not reading this series. Moving on, next we have one that I am really excited to read, and that's Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. First of all, this is a standalone, woohoo! What I've heard about this is that it's compulsively readable and it has a magic library. This is one that I'm just really tempted to pick up. I'm in a little bit of a book hangover right now because I just finished the Book of Atrix Wolf by Patricia A. McKillop, and I'm kind of wanting something else with like mages and sorcerers and magic books. So this is kind of calling to me. I have high hopes. I hope to love it. And then the last book on the YA list is The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, which is like a heist thing. It's also historical fantasy, which appeals to me. I think this might be another like popcorn easy reading YA that I might really like. I have put a library hold on this, but it isn't in yet. The thing about this that I find a little ironic is that this is the second year in a row now that Roshani Chokshi has had a book on the BooktubeSFF Awards shortlist that is not the book of hers that I actually want to read. I really want to read The Star-Touched Queen. I've wanted to read it since it came out. I did read Aru Shah last year when it was nominated. I was a little underwhelmed by it. I still want to read The Star-Touched Queen, and I will be a little frustrated if the BooktubeSFF Awards keep me reading all of her books except the one that I want to read. Best Middle Grade is the other category with 4 nominees. I've read one of them. It's Dragon Pearl by Yoon Lee. This is another one that I rated 3 stars. I liked it enough, but not enough to nominate it. In short, this has a lot of things in common with Yoon Lee's adult series, The Machineries of Empire, in terms of the type of space empire this takes place in terms of the type of military science fiction that this is. It's kind of the opposite of that series in a couple of key ways, though, because even though the world building is non-conventional, it is both fantasy and science fiction. It is laid out really clearly for you from chapter 1. On the other hand, I feel like a lot of people, myself included, felt that the characters were really the strength of the Machineries of Empire books, and I thought the character development in this one was really underwhelming. I felt like the main character was just a very generic middle grade protagonist. So that's Dragon Pearl. And then the other book on this list that I want to read is the other one that's from the Rick Riordan Presents imprint, and that's Sal and Gabby Break the Universe by Carlos Hernandez, which I really don't know anything about except that it has some really strong, glowing reviews. The 2 I've decided I will not read are Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab, which is the sequel to City of Ghosts, and Dead Voices by Katherine Arden, which is the sequel to Small Spaces. 2 reasons I will read neither of these books. Number 1, they are both sequels, and having assembled as many of the books that I want to read from this shortlist as I have, looking at that stack, I am just not going to be reading second books in series where I have to read the first book to get to them. It's not happening. Secondly, these are both spooky things, and I am also just not reading spooky things right now. I have mentioned before that I put myself in a serious reading slump reading spooky things this fall, and I'm just For now, not permanently, but for now, I'm pulling back on the spooky. Even the middle grade spooky, which is probably going to be manageable levels of spooky. I know, it's just not what I'm in the mood for. And then finally, the short work category. So the first thing nominated is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel, which is the second book that is in the same boat as Recursion for me, in that it was published by a non-genre specific publisher and is just in my publishing blind spot. I had no idea Sylvain Neuvel had a novella that came out last year until this showed up on the shortlist. Now, unlike Recursion, once I read what this is about, I was actually very intrigued and thought that I might want to read this. This looks like it's a potentially Brexit-inspired, like, dystopian immigrant British citizenship thing. I might be up for some searing political commentary of novella length. I have put a library hold on this. I'm not making any promises about reading it though. Next is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, which is the third book on this shortlist overall that was something I rated 3 stars, didn't hate, but also didn't like enough to nominate. I feel like the problems I had this book are very specific, sort of nitpick things that aren't going to be the same things that other people will want to criticize about this story. Overall, Becky Chambers does really character-driven science fiction, and I felt like this failed as a character-driven story. Again, though, I didn't hate it. I'm not mad that it's on the list. And then the third and final book on the novella shortlist is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. This is one I really want to read. It's been on my radar since before it was released. It was on my most anticipated reads of 2019 video. I am not, however, I think, going to be able to get my hands on a copy of this in the next 2 months. My library seems to have just not ordered enough copies, and there's an insanely long holds list. I'm on the holds list, but oh boy, it's not happening in the next 2 months that way. So there's a chance I will cave and go out to a bookstore and purchase a new copy of this for full price. There is a chance. However, I am hesitant to do that because I think there's a significant chance that this will end up on the Hugo shortlist, and if it does, I would be hoping that it might be included in the Hugo voter packet. So I don't want to go out and buy a copy until I know for certain that I'm not getting it from the Hugo voter packet. So it is a little frustrating that the book in the novella category that I am most excited for, that I most think I will love, or that I might love, it's going to be the one that I don't think I'm going to have a chance to read. But sometimes that's just life. So then, a brief rundown of what's now on my TBR for the next 2 months. This is essentially like most of my TBR for the next 2 months is going to be trying to read these books because it's a lot of them. I am generally going to prioritize books I own over books I have from the library, with a couple of exceptions. My number one priority, because I own it and it's nominated in 2 categories, is A Memory Called Empire. This is not the book on this list I'm like itching to grab with my fingers immediately the most, but I will be prioritizing it for those more rational-minded reasons. The other thing that I have to prioritize for rational-minded reasons is The Priory of the Orange Tree, because as I mentioned, library holds due date, massive book, etc. Then my next 2 priorities are the other 2 books in the fantasy category, which are the books that I was most hotly anticipating the release of, that I am still kicking myself that I haven't read yet, that I think I'm going to love, that I own, that I have owned since the day they were published. Now, in terms of other library things, which are a step down in priority from these 4 books, these are the 4 books that if I read nothing else, I want to read these 4 books. The ones that are on the very next rung for me would be This Is How You Lose the Time War if I had it, which I don't. And then probably Sorcery of Thorns, just because I think this might be the book that is calling to me right at this instant. I may read it before I read the books that I am rationally prioritizing, just because this one is calling to me. I'm also in this last very narrow window before Hugo nominations close, looking for things to maybe nominate in a few different categories, including the Lodestar. I started reading War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi because that was one of the books I had on hand that would be Lodestar eligible. But while I've started that, I'm not very far into it. It hasn't really grabbed me, and I don't know if at this rate I'm going to finish it on time to be able to make a judgment about nominating it or not. So if I wanted to prioritize Sorcery of Thorns, my justification would be that I'd be putting aside War Girls for now and reading something that I think would be more bingeable as an alternative last-minute pre-nomination YA read. And that leaves my lower priority books being the rest of the YA and middle grade nominees, which are The Wicked King, The Gilded Wolves, which is not yet in my hands but will be soon because of my library hold, and Sal and Gabby Break the Universe. Oh, and then also The Test once I get that library hold in as well. So anyhow, those are my thoughts on the BooktubeSFF Awards shortlist this year. Let me know if you'll be reading along for the read-alongs and if your reading priorities line up with mine at all. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.